In the beginning of my time in Paris, I really wanted to be incognito as an American. I didn't want people to identify me. Gut reaction was to smile. Big smile, big cheesy grin at them. Maralee and Maralee are the same person, but different in some ways too.
Yeah, your French avatar.
Exactly. We were meeting a group of friends at a bar, and I approached my seat at the table, and I guess slammed down the umbrella just a little bit when I was sitting down. My friend said, "So American."
What?
How are all these fit French people eating dessert every day?
You know you're a bit French when? Well, hello Maralee.
Hi.
I'll try to say your name properly. Sorry in advance. This one is a bit difficult for French. So thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
It's a bit warm in Paris.
Yeah.
So hopefully we won't be sweating as well. But no, so well, I found you on TikTok. You're almost everywhere on social medias. You have a Substack. You have a lot of things. So I don't know what you haven't conquered already. but most importantly, you're from the US and you decided to move to France.
I am. That's right. In 2018, I moved to Paris as a fille au pair. An au pair, and I moved with a French host family, and they made all the difference in the world for me in terms of how I wanted to choose to live my life in France. When I first arrived to France, I was feeling kind of unsure of my direction in my life, and when I moved in with my host family, they treated me like one of their own from day one.
Oh, that's amazing.
And they really made a huge effort to strongly incorporate me into French culture as well as the culture of their family. So anywhere we went, they would explain to me some kind of unspoken rules of French culture and things that maybe people don't always say out loud about cultural differences.
What do you want to say to kids?
Exactly, exactly. And so in living with them, I not only got the chance to improve and build on my French level, but also in my understanding of French culture. And
where was that?
That was in Paris.
Oh, nice.
So that's where it all began.
Ah, nice. Yes, amazing. So that was your really like, that's how you discovered France, but also mostly like the French culture at wide, because like they kind of help you deep dive into this.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
How old were the kids or kid?
They were, when I arrived, they were 3 years old and 6 years old.
Oh, well, 3 years old might have been brutal for the accent to understand them.
Well, I was told by the dad of the family, the host dad, don't get your French advice from the younger one. She is constantly making errors, saying "j'ai faim," that sort of thing. I have hunger instead of like I am hungry. So those little things, but I still was able to practice my French in kind of a non-judgmental way, dealing with kids.
Learning as well as the 3 years old.
Exactly. I kind of spoke in franglais a little bit. I would speak in English to them, or my broken French in the beginning, and they were very open-minded about it, not too judgmental. So it helped me to learn.
I say that to everyone, well, I'm speaking as a French native. I mean, English accents, obviously American accent, is super sexy. So don't lose it. Don't lose it. It's very
okay,
important.
I'll do my best.
At least part of it.
Okay.
So well, I saw in some of your contents, and I mean, you mentioned actually the most potent viral clip you did, which was Not an American in Paris.
Yeah, that's right.
I love the title.
Yeah.
Emily in Paris was already around, or?
No, it was before any of that. I was Emily before Emily.
Oh well, okay. So that make it, so that what's the funniest cultural influence, things that you might have experienced in France that are not in your video, like you've described it, Not an American in Paris?
Sure. So I would say in general, I in the beginning of my time in Paris, I really wanted to be incognito as an American. I didn't want people to identify me as American, but I kept finding myself doing these things that would give me away. Before I would even speak, people knew that I was American. So something like when I would be in the Paris metro and I would make eye contact with a stranger, and my gut reaction was to smile. big smile, big cheesy grin at them. And they looked at me like I was crazy. But I have since kind of kicked that habit. But the truth is, I'm never going to be totally incognito as an American. I think part of what makes me like me is my Americanness. And that's, as much as I love France, I also have those roots. And I'm happy to be
honestly,
an American in Paris.
Maybe you'll contradict me, but I don't think so. Well, hopefully not. But usually, you know, like the French, you know, in general and like at wide, like we love Americans, don't we?
I would say I've had a good reception generally as an
always
American
the odd
in Paris.
guy, yeah.
Of course, there's those tired old stereotypes, but in reality, I've never met someone in real life who has been rude or resorted to nasty stereotypes when they're actually talking to me face to face. So I've had generally a warm reception, I would say.
Okay, well, mostly positive then. Well, actually, speaking about that, you seem to make a point of distinguishing, you know, expat from migrants, and like you prefer to consider yourself the latter.
Yeah, generally, yes. Now, to be clear, I don't necessarily take offense to being called an expat by other people, because I think the intention is good there. There's no negative intention necessarily. But I do identify when I speak about myself as an immigrant, because for me, the difference lies in the duration of your stay. As an expat, maybe you're coming for a few years or maybe even a decade, but you know that eventually you're planning to return to your home base.
Interesting.
For me, that's not the case. I am planning to stay and live here, become a citizen, and spend the rest of my life in France.
But that's it's an interesting angle, because I think that even in French it would apply. Never asked myself the question, but I think there's the same. I mean, we tend to generalize and say an expat, someone that's not from here or from around. But you're right.
Yeah, I don't mind being called one. That's okay. Either way.
Well, as an immigrant, so now you've also mentioned like kind of an ever-evolving, I'd say, relationship with shopkeepers.
Oh yes, yeah, absolutely. For me, I would say the moment when I really started feeling like a local in my neighborhood was when the shopkeepers started to know me. They knew my name, they knew my order, they knew when I had been gone for a few weeks, and they would make conversation with me, and I thought, I own this town. No, but it just made me feel like I really belonged.
Also, you've mentioned, so you also have like a Substack.
I do.
And you mentioned a deeper connection to France. You know, it's like there's like the Substack, Why I Choose Paris.
Yeah.
You mind elaborate on that?
Absolutely. I, in a way, kind of feel like, it maybe sounds corny, but Paris kind of chose me. I feel like I was sort of built for it in a way. There are certain elements of my personality that really align very strongly with the personality of Paris, such as I am an easygoing person. I don't like to be tense or stressed all the time. I would identify myself as a pretty poetic person, someone who likes to kind of get lost in her thoughts, journal what's going on in her brain, that sort of thing. And that sort of slower, dreamy, romantic, and whimsical energy is all throughout Paris. And so I feel like I'm aligned with the city very well in that way.
Well, that's why we call it a city of love.
Exactly, exactly.
Yeah, that's still, there's a lot of very nice districts or places in general, indeed. I don't want to misspell it. So Maralee is, that's your name, but also you like to say you have like a second French name.
I do. When French people pronounce my name, they say it in a French accent, naturally. So they call me Maralee. This was the name that my little host kids used to call me ever since I moved to Paris. And so I would hear from the other room, Maralee, anytime anything went wrong. And it just
sounds cute.
Wormed its way into my heart. I found it adorable. And so since then, I kind of felt like that's my second name in a way. Yeah.
I mean, it sounds close, but also with the French accent, like you said.
Yeah, so
it's nice.
Maralee and Maralee are the same person, but different in some ways too.
Your French avatar.
Exactly. There you go.
Well, actually, speaking about French, let's talk about the language. Well, I'm sure learning French comes with a couple mishaps.
Yes, that's saying it lightly.
Disclose a couple funny ones.
Oh my gosh, yeah. This just happened to me, I think, 2 nights ago. So I was babysitting, actually, a family of 2 little boys.
Okay.
The older boy is 7 years old, and we were getting ready for bed, and he was kind of in a goofy mood, and I was kind of chasing him around, telling him that we need to brush our teeth and get ready for bed, right? And so I handed him his toothbrush, but he was kind of laughing and squirming, and he got toothpaste all over his shirt. So he made a mess. And I was trying to say to him in French, "You made a mess." And I said, "C'est un bordel." But he asked me to repeat it. I said, "C'est un bordel." And he laughed. He laughed really hard. And I was like, I wonder what the reason was for that. So I got on ChatGPT and said, I said "c'est un bordel" to a kid. Is it all right? Why did he laugh so hard? And they said, bordel means brothel. Oh, okay. Okay,
Which
well,
could mean a mess as well. But
I think bazar probably is a better
bazar would have
alternative. But, there's those little, unspoken rules about what context it's appropriate to say words in, what's maybe a little too vulgar for a kid, or what's more appropriate for a kid.
Slang.
Exactly. So it's it's a learning process, but there's a lot of laughter along the way.
But it's funny because a lot of the time I'm hearing that quite often. The bordel. I've never heard about this.
I hear
but it's
my
almost
adult
always
friends.
sexualized.
Yeah, exactly. I hear my adult friends use it all the time to say oh, it's just crazy. It's mess. It's not.
Yeah, but between adults, there's it's okay to speak some slang words.
Sure.
And,
sure, but maybe not in front of a 7-year-old.
But it's a funny one. Yeah, the fact of living in France may have changed your view of your American identity. You were telling me that as well.
Yes, absolutely, it did. I would say, in general, getting some distance from your home culture can really give you a bit of clarity on the things that you like and maybe don't like about your own culture, and it can just shift your attitude towards where you come from. For example, I've found that there's less of an over-consumerist culture here in France, whereas in the U.S., people sometimes when they list their hobbies, they say going to Target as one of their main hobbies, and that's
sounds a bit weird.
It does sound a bit weird, and that was totally normalized in the U.S., where I would go to Starbucks, go to Chick-fil-A, go to Target, and that was everyone's idea of a perfect day.
Oh, I have one for you. I mean, I don't know if it's me, or would you confirm that, but it seems like the French would not get the takeaway coffee and sip it on the go.
A huge difference between the cultures, the coffee culture, for sure. I think that is something that tends to be very specific to any country that you go to, and France and America are no different, of course. Takeaway coffee is huge. Drive-thrus, takeaway coffee, to-go cups, even having kind of a all-day coffee, I like to call it, where you'll go to someplace like Dunkin' Donuts, and they give you a coffee that's larger than the size of the human stomach. So you can't drink it all at once. You have to kind of drink it throughout the day. Whereas in French culture, it seems to me that there's more of a sit-down coffee culture and enjoying perhaps a smaller but maybe stronger amount of coffee, and it can be more flavorful, and they are less likely to use things like syrups or heavily processed creamers like they do in the U.S. very commonly. So that's a huge difference.
No, but that's interesting because, well, this is the kind of difference I've seen the other way around. Well, like when I'm in the U.S. and, on a business meeting or something, and I'm invited out, business-wise, and so they very often go to those food trucks.
Oh,
like
sure.
takeaway food.
Yeah.
But you're supposed to hit that on the way back to the office.
Yeah, while you're walking.
I was just too French for that. I remember saying that. I was like, I'm sorry, I'm too French. I need to sit down.
Oh, yeah. Sitting and eating. I think that's another big difference where there's fundamentally a difference between how Americans and French people consume coffee, consume food. There is a slowness and a quiet appreciation in French culture that I've noticed, at least, where Americans are more likely to appreciate convenience over quality.
And efficiency sometimes. I mean, also there's a good side to it, but it's actually a good and an up and a downside in France, because like everything runs slower, like people take their time, which is rather on the upside.
Yeah.
But also, like, when you're in a hurry and you need service, and sometimes, like, you may have to wait because they take their time.
I think ultimately it speaks to the American idea of productivity is king. And ultimately, you want to get as much done as possible in the shortest amount of time possible. And that's an American virtue that French people don't necessarily always share.
Just realized the number of bank holidays, actually, the fact that we even have a word for them when there is a day off in between, like a bank holiday and a weekend, for example. We have a word in French for that. We call that faire le pont.
Yeah,
like the
bridge.
Yeah. So because we have so many of them, and I never occurred to me, because I'm French, that other cultures, UK, US, you hardly have one or two, so and they're fixed. I mean, in the US, even taking a few days off, it can impact your potential to even get promoted at your job. It's seen as lazy. It's not seen as kind of a fundamental part of life and of being human, like it is here in France, where days off are necessary. Ultimately, sure they are.
and the irony is, I think that ultimately days off do, in turn, increase productivity long term, whereas in the US. In the US, that's not the...
I'm French, so I'm convinced.
Of course, that's not the attitude so much in the US.
Yeah, also, you mentioned that you've studied art.
Yeah.
Did it change your, I'd say, impact view of the Parisian life?
Absolutely. I would say fundamentally there are differences in how art is perceived, art and culture are perceived as being fundamental to the culture. And so it's, in the US, for example, government funding of artistic institutions like museums is non-existent.
Okay.
Museums have to fundraise all their own.
Privately.
Exactly. And so that comes from ticket sales, that comes from galas, something like the Met Gala. That's ultimately fundraising for an artistic institution. Whereas in France, there is an attitude that it is a fundamental part and a collective responsibility to preserve that part of the culture. So government funding goes towards museums or artistic institutions. And I think that also translates to daily life, for me at least, because there's such a strong appreciation for maintaining the art, the architecture, the cultural history of a city, especially like Paris. It impacts the quality of life of the people who live there. So when you're walking from one location to the next in Paris, you're bound to see tons of historical elements that maybe you might not see in a young country like the United States.
Oh, well, this is one of, I mean, again, I'm biased, I'm French, but like people say this is the most beautiful city in the world and something. I mean, just the buildings themselves, Haussmannian buildings, some very old buildings, and it's, like you were saying, also a lot of arts and statues and stuff like this around every corner, basically. And that's amazing, Yeah, and it survived nowadays, because that's also a city that I've seen world wars and stuff, so it's really impressive, and not to mention the museum, like you were saying, so it's great. So you seem to have a particular affection for, and I'll try to say the name in an English way, Jane Birkin?
Jane Birkin, yes, of course. Yes.
So, well, tell me your because you mentioned your apartment story. So.
Yes, so I have a huge appreciation for Jane Birkin's story, her aesthetic, her attitude about life. So, as you may know, there's a very famous bag named after her, of course, the Birkin bag. And it's famously one of the most expensive bags that I think has ever existed. But Jane Birkin, while she was alive, she recently passed away, she carried a Birkin with her most everywhere she went, but she stuffed it full to the brim with documents and with just knickknacks, and would decorate the outside with pins or with chains or just political buttons even. She would take something that was really expensive, really valuable financially. But she would get every last drop of pleasure out of it. And that was kind of her attitude towards life in general, I'd say. She was originally from the UK, but she moved to France and she became the partner of Serge Gainsbourg, the famous French singer. And she became a favorite in the hearts and the minds of the French public. And that's my goal too. I want to become a coup de cœur of the French public as ultimately an immigrant to the country.
Well, you sure have a lot of followers. I've seen congratulations on your TikTok, for example. Well, there's fashion, there's food as well. I mean,
sure.
This is France. This
Sure.
is one of the very important things. And definitely, coming from the US, is there any, I would say, French food tradition that you think is misunderstood or the Americans misunderstand?
Sure. Plenty, but I'll name one. I think Americans tend to be a little surprised when they hear that it's not uncommon, particularly for French kids, to eat dessert every day. That's not out of the ordinary to have some sort of dessert every day. Yeah, and as you should. Life is worth living. But ultimately, I think that comes from differing definitions of what constitutes a dessert. Like in France, it's very normal to eat some fruit or yogurt with a little sprinkle of sugar on top as your dessert. A cheese, absolutely. Very normalized, and that's just not necessarily dessert in the minds of Americans. So when they think, how are all these fit French people eating dessert every day? Well, first of all, they live in a walkable community. And second of all, their desserts are not necessarily cookies and cakes and pies, but...
Actually, quite rarely.
Yeah, in general, I'd say it's pretty rare to have those kind of heavier desserts that are so commonly defined as desserts in the U.S.
Interesting. Okay, wow. It's an interesting view. Never thought about that, actually. Yeah, I think I was sometimes like, well, isn't that a bit much? Because I see my kids like, we have this, I mean, it's like, it's like, you have the main and then the dessert at the very least,
It's a normal.
Okay, well, it's good to know. Well, it makes me feel better, at least. Okay, and you've been around for a while, we could say. So is there already any French habit you can give up now?
For me, I think that I am addicted to a good, slow morning. Not being in a rush to get to work. My roles in the U.S., I would have to be in the office by 8 a.m., whereas here it's closer to 10.
Or 9 at least would be the norm.
Like absolutely. It depends on where you're working. Yeah, sure. It depends on where you're working, I suppose. But it's totally normal for me and many of my friends to prepare a full breakfast before work, even go to a workout class or go for a walk before work. And it makes a big difference in how you live your life to have, these kind of moments outside of just your job, defining who you are.
And the midday break as well, because it's like
certainly
typically at least an hour in France. Could be 2. I mean, I know in my office it's 2. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So well, okay, that's a good one. And well, although those are really interesting things, but I suppose that's not exactly what it's probably part of it, but that's not what want you stay or live in France long term as an immigrant, like you were saying. So what would be the main reasons? I mean, you fell in love with France, or?
Yeah. Ultimately, the reason that I knew France was for me was because I went. I could physically feel a change in my body, and I'm not just talking about having healthier food here in France or less processed food. It was about a fundamental misalignment in the United States for me. I'm a very sensitive person, and so when I experience strong emotions, it manifests in my body. I have, heavy stomach aches or just feel more nauseous, and I found myself feeling nearly constantly ill when I moved back to the U.S. after living here as an au pair for a year. I got accustomed to the French lifestyle and just living here, the schedule of living here. And when I moved back to the United States, I was there for about 2 years during the pandemic. And I'm telling you, just about every day I felt sick. It had nothing to do with COVID. I just felt like there was a misalignment there. And so ultimately, a lot of my family and friends, of course, are in the US, but I knew that it was right for me to stay here in France just because my body knew it. My body told me.
Okay, well, that's more like love at first sight, but with the country.
Yeah, kind of.
That's amazing. Okay, well, thank you for that. I feel lucky to have you then.
Oh, that's nice.
And also, yes, this is something that you've mentioned. I've seen that. I think it was on one of your TikTok or Substack. I forgot, but that you want to give back in a way to the community.
Yeah. Absolutely, that's something that's really important to me. As an immigrant, you're kind of a permanent guest in a way. And in some ways, I really feel like I want to make my presence here in France a very positive one. Mm-hmm. I'm not interested in reiterating stereotypes or just being a negative presence. And so one way that I feel that I'm able to make my presence in France a very positive one is sharing my anecdotes, my stories, via my social media channels, via any sort of platform. I love talking about how many positive experiences I've had here in France and how I've come to realize that certain stereotypes like French people being rude or aggressive are not necessarily based in truth. Ultimately, I think cultural differences, as someone who has experienced both cultures, cultural differences can help us to understand each other better as long as we take the time to understand the logic behind each other's actions. So by sharing my story and my perspective as someone who has spent time in both cultures, I think it can help us to develop a better relationship between France and the US.
Well, very interesting because you mentioned, the stereotypes.
Oh, yeah. And there are many.
Care to try to debunk a few? Sure. So you've mentioned like French being rude and stuff, but maybe...
I think genuinely, just about every single stereotype between what French people think of Americans and what Americans think of French people, just about every single one of them is not true, frankly, especially the negative ones. Truly, I think the idea that Americans are stupid or that French people are all rude, it's based out of, I think, a misunderstanding of some of the systemic or fundamental cultural issues that are at play here. Like in the US, the fact that maybe American people cannot necessarily name where Belgium is on a map. But then again, most French people probably couldn't name where Iowa is on a map. So, I think that ultimately these misunderstandings and these stereotypes are rooted in repetition more than anything else. Just because we have these kind of repetitive things that are said about each other doesn't mean that they're true. It can come from bias, and ultimately I hope to use my platform to eliminate some of those biases.
But there's always like an origin story, and that's why, and people like to fuel then those stereotypes or, like for example, like the French stinks. This is one of those. But, I've learned that recently that during Louis XIV, they were convinced that disease was spread through water.
Right. So taking a bath.
Yes.
Dirty.
But also, this is why they invented perfume, because he got his alchemist to come to his cause. Like, I can't stand it.
Yeah, ultimately. Yeah, that's true.
So there's always something good that comes out of it. And maybe you can tell the audience that by now, we're no longer in Louis XIV's reign. And so we bath now.
We've passed that time. And so ultimately, sometimes these outdated lines of logic somehow worm their way into our present day. And we just have to talk about it because it's not necessarily based in fact anymore.
So it doesn't smell too bad in France.
No, not too bad. Except for some days on the metro on a hot summer day. Yeah, it's not the best. But...
Yes, that's a problem. And vice versa, do you still find yourself do some very, let's say, stereotypical American things that you do in your French life?
Oh, yeah. I would say there's many things that I do, but I'm lucky enough to have many friends here in France who are very honest with me when I do something that's
nice.
very American. And I don't take offense to it, but they've told me that even the way that I move physically, I remember one time I had a friend, we were meeting a group of friends at a bar, and I approached my seat at the table, said hi to everyone, and I had an umbrella. And I guess slammed down the umbrella just a little bit when I was sitting down, not intentionally. But when I sat down, my friend said, "So American."
Wow.
Said, "Why?" He said, "You just, not in a bad way, but you just act like you belong wherever you are." Okay. I didn't take too much offense to it. It was something kind of lighthearted, funny observation. And I think it actually really helps me see into the mind of how I'm perceived by the culture that I'm living within, you know? And so these little things kind of give each other away as Americans.
But it's like a French person wearing a scarf.
Precisely. There's little things that little details that help us kind of see each other for
sometimes
who we really are.
It makes funny but awkward moment, like when we met. I was like, you wanted to shake hands, and I was like, oh, well, I thought you wanted la bise.
Sometimes it's a handshake, sometimes it's a hug, sometimes it's la bise.
Yeah. But that's all. That's actually when it's like, because we both like standing still and say, okay, what should we do now?
Yeah, but that's cultural differences. Sometimes it's a little funny. Uncomfortable, but we laugh. Exactly.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's what life's about.
Exactly.
It's about those awkward moments, which are actually funny. Yeah.
Totally.
So before we call it a wrap, there's let's say if you can finish this sentence. Well, you know you're a bit French when
you can complain about France, but the second someone who's not French does, you defend her with your life. Unacceptable. Excuse me, you can't say that.
This is one of the best answers. I don't think I've asked the question before. That's a very good answer.
Thank you.
I'll write it down for posterity.
Okay, great.
Great. Well, Maralee, thank you so much for answering all my questions. I bombarded you a bit. So before we call it a go, where can people reach out to you? What do you want to leave as a final message?
Absolutely. So, of course, I have a platform on TikTok. I am also on Instagram and Substack at Maralee Bell, MARALEEBELL. I'm also looking for a permanent CDI role here in Paris. And so as an art and culture lover, especially somebody who's looking to share her passion for France with English-speaking audiences, I would love to work in a role like that. So if you have any interest, my contact information is available via my TikTok under the link in my bio. So you feel free to reach out to me for any sort of job opportunities. I would appreciate it.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
And that's actually how I found you, because your contact details are there. So it's really very easy to reach out. And you do respond.
I do.
Well, Maralee, thank you again. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for having me.
See you soon.
Thanks.
Bye. Well, very good. Yeah.